Opinions stated in this podcast should not be used as evidence. Assume that any cited evidence can be found in the related Candor Briefs releases. Thank you, and welcome to Former Partners. Hi, welcome to Former Partners Podcast. My name is Quentin Cooper. I'm a former debater that peaked in high school and can't really get over it, so I started Candor Briefs and this podcast with my former partner,
Lucas Monroe. I am also a former debater that I don't believe peaked in high school, and I don't believe that Quentin peaked in high school either, but we'll get into that later.
That's just a way for me to cop out of any responsibilities that I have as an adult now. Anyway, we're former partners.
Yeah, we are the Former Partners Podcast, and we welcome you to the 4th episode of our podcast. We're so excited to have you guys here, and we're so excited to announce that we have nearly hit
1,000 episodes. 1,000 plays on our episodes.
1,000 listens is what we're going to call it to make it easy for you guys.
At the time of this recording, we're at 990, and it's increasing like 50 a day. So probably by the time I post this episode, we'll be at 1,000, which is so cool.
We're blown away, man. We were not expecting this kind of result. Everywhere you look online tells you not to expect this kind of result. And I mean, we owe it all to you. We can't thank you enough that you guys are so interested in this. It's really given us the inspiration to move forward on it, to hopefully give you better content in the future.
Yeah, we're very happy to be doing this. Sorry for not having an episode for the past 2 weeks.
Yeah, so I don't know if you knew, but 2 weeks ago was Christmas, so I'm not really going to apologize for missing that one.
Yeah, I mean, I was like an hour and a half away.
Yeah, and I was, doing Christmas, so...
Yeah. Happy holidays, guys.
Happy holidays.
And then last week, you see, we planned on just taking a week off, and everybody was going to be cool with it because it was holidays, and just picking up last week.
But last week, I had the worst sinus infection I've ever had in my life. I didn't even know that they could do that to you. And I had no voice, and I was coughing like every 30 seconds, and it just wouldn't have been a good episode for you guys.
We considered still making an episode.
But
just because we were like, it's been a week. Like, we can't skip 2 weeks.
But the editing on that would have taken forever, and the quality would have been so much lower. And so we just decided it was better to wait until I was feeling better, and I am now. So Here we are.
So here we are. Other big news. There's a website now, candordebate.com.
Ooh.
I finally just spent a few bucks and bought the domain and made a website. And to celebrate the release of the website, the briefs are on there, all the public forum briefs. If you enter the promo code 2019 at checkout, you can get 75% off the briefs. The second release is out on the website, ready to purchase. So if you use that code 2019, it'll come out to a few bucks. I don't know exactly what it is.
Pennies on the dollar. And all of that money goes straight back into this whole project, keeping the podcast going, keeping the brief going, keeping us fed so that we don't die in between making episodes.
I'm close. I'm a hungry boy.
It's true. He is a hungry boy. I don't know if you've seen Quentin before, but...
I'm really skinny.
He likes Big Macs.
Not big. I like double quarter pounders with cheese.
You're right.
Double quarter pounders with cheese.
And McDonald's, send us some love. We love your food.
And McDonald's. I'd be down for a sponsorship.
Yeah. I know that I'm enjoying it. I can't say your catchphrase because I think that would almost be a guaranteed copyright strike. So I really like it.
Ba-da-ba-ba-ba. I really enjoy it. Woo. What we're talking about today is sort of an in-depth episode on federal debt reduction versus economic growth. We have an introduction to this topic available. It was our last episode. No, it was the episode before last.
Yes.
It was episode number 2. And that was just sort of an introduction to it. We talked argumentation a little bit, framework, some of the evidence available. This episode is in depth. We're going to do a debate. We're going to talk about deeper arguments.
I'm gonna crush Quentin in a debate.
I think it'll be very educational.
I'm gonna have a very educational time crushing Quentin at this debate.
You guys are going to hear something that happened a few times while we were partners, but we tried to stay away from it just because it would get messy sometimes.
Yeah. Debating your partner is actually a wonderful way to improve your partnership. It's a tip I just want to go ahead and share with all the partnerships listening, if there are any. Have your partner be a first speaker and have your other partner be a second speaker, and read your case and then attack your own case as the second speaker, and just switch off and just do that as many times as you need to until you're great.
Or a full debate, Mav versus Mav.
That works too.
It's fun, but it can get messy. It's difficult and weird going against the person that you trust every day.
Your second speaker will hate it because they'll have to read case, and that's the worst thing in the world.
And your first speaker will hate it because it's hard writing a 4-minute attacking speech when you never have to do that.
That being said, we think it's a really useful tool. It's something that we did often while we were still in the program.
Before we get into that, though, which that will be happening in the next few minutes, we're going to get that started as quickly as possible just because I'm excited, for one. But two, it's going to be really fun and educational. I like using that word now, educational. I feel like that gets us more views on YouTube.
It's like a trigger word for our FBI agent that's watching all of our episodes and controlling how popular they get.
He doesn't hear all of the secret messages and subliminal stuff we're sending.
Because we just keep saying educational. So we're clearing the filter. We're okay for now.
Yep, we are good.
So yeah, if you like this episode, make sure that you comment educational down below.
Educational. Yeah, if you're watching on YouTube, comment the word educational so we know that you get what we're saying.
Nobody else will understand but us, and you'll be in a secret club with us and our FBI agent.
Not even he's out of the loop.
You're right.
He doesn't know.
The FBI, we're on to you.
He's like, wow, this must be very educational. I'll just skip this one tonight.
We're getting tangential.
What we want to talk about for this topic is how versus why. We've talked about this before, but we were asked to go over it a little bit more.
What is the topic? Could you give me the resolution really quick, just so everybody's on the same page?
Resolved. The United States federal government should prioritize reducing the federal debt over promoting economic growth.
Okay, that helps me a lot.
So the idea is you're going to want to show how to reduce the federal debt or how to promote economic growth, but that doesn't matter if you don't show why that's preferable to the other side.
Yeah, the how is given to you by the resolution. That's the easy part. You say, oh, well, we need to do economic growth. We're going to do that by cutting taxes on everybody who makes more than $250,000 a year. And this is why that works, or this is why that's important, rather than stopping it right there.
Yeah, you have absolutely no need to show how. The resolution doesn't ask you to. The judge doesn't care what a high school student has to say about a new policy, unless you're in policy. I didn't say that.
Episodes to come for policy. If you want to see Candor briefs go into territory uncharted even by them, let us know in the comments down below. Comment policy.
Yeah, policy and educational. I wrote a K, actually.
Oh, really?
A propaganda K, yeah.
That sounds horrible.
No, it's actually really good. It pretty much says...
Yeah, but it's a K, so...
I love Ks. Anyway.
You would.
What?
I'm
sorry?
Think that critiques are one of the least educational parts of debate.
No, actually, critiques started because when debate first started, lower funded schools didn't have access to evidence.
Really?
So in order to compete with higher funded schools, they made theory arguments Ks.
I withdraw my statement. Critiques are important because it's allowing some competitive...
Yeah, I mean, it's not nearly as big as an issue as it used to be. Everybody has pretty much the same access now.
Thanks to the internet.
Internet, yeah. But yeah, that's where Case started.
Shout out to Al Gore for getting the internet started.
Al Gore, he's the man.
Is he? What does he do now?
Is he alive? Is he still alive?
He's definitely still alive. I feel like we
Yeah.
would have heard if Al Gore had died.
You know, he kind of looks like Ronald Reagan.
He also kind of looks like George Bush. I don't know. He's like a amalgamation of a bunch of famous political figures that fell to the wayside.
He also sort of looks like Richard Nixon.
Yeah, exactly.
You know what? He looks like
Like
an old white
a
dude.
guy that should have been president in the year 2000. Hashtag Florida.
Thanks a
Hashtag
lot,
recount.
Florida. Thanks, Jeb.
Yeah.
Okay, anyway. How versus why? We're really bad at that.
At what?
At going off like that.
Oh, at tangents?
Yeah.
I think that it brings a certain educational quality to the podcast.
Yeah, certain educational quality.
Plus, I mean, I don't feel like you're all here just to listen to strictly debate stuff. Hopefully, we can entertain you a little bit
I
in
don't know,
between.
One of the comments on the last episode was literally, "Can you guys talk about the topic, please?"
Whoever made that comment. Yes, we can talk about. We can talk about the topic.
Oh wow, that clipped so hard when I coughed.
Yeah, you should probably go ahead and pause it and cut that out, and we'll rewind.
I'll just do it. I'll do it in post. It's
Okay,
fine.
do it in post. Do it live. Whoever made that comment, our apologies if we're going too off track for you. I'm sure that there's loads of other educational podcasts
Educational.
for debate that you can check out that stay way more on topic than us.
And we're about to get super on topic, so we're just
So-
trying to relax for a minute.
Yeah, and
But let's get into how versus why.
how versus why. We just briefly touched on it.
How doesn't matter if you don't show why. How doesn't matter at all.
Yeah, how really doesn't matter. How's, as we said, how is given to you by the resolution. If you're the pro team, by default, the how is going to be prioritizing economic growth. No, the opposite.
Prioritizing reducing the federal debt.
Prioritizing reducing the federal debt.
Right, but if you're pro, showing how to reduce the federal debt isn't in your burden.
It's not your job. Your job is to say why reducing the federal debt ought be prioritized over increasing economic growth. So whenever you're framing the round and you're setting up those framework arguments, don't focus on methodologies of reducing the federal debt. Focus on why reducing the federal debt is preferable. And I know that seems kind of straightforward and obvious with the topic, but
And the topic is actually worded in a way so that one, pro can essentially fiat that if you vote pro, the federal debt will be reduced. Con, however, says promote economic growth. Con does not say you vote con and economic growth is created. Con is you vote con and we try to create economic growth. And that's a balancing thing. Because if it was con is absolutely fiat, economic growth is created, con could win every time. Right?
yeah, for the most part, yeah.
So you have to argue that promoting economic growth is the best move, not that economic growth itself is the best move.
Yeah, that is a good distinction to make, the difference between the actual reduction of the federal debt versus the promotion of economic growth.
Right. It's not federal debt versus economic growth. It's federal debt, federal debt reduction versus economic growth. It's federal debt reduction versus trying to create economic growth. Because those two things against each other, creating economic growth as a sure thing will win every time. But trying to create economic growth makes it more balanced between the two. Does that make sense?
Yes,
To you, at least?
I would say so. I still occasionally flip-flop which side is advocating for which.
It's easy to do.
But I really think that has to do with my own lack
Brain.
of preparation on the topic.
Yeah.
And hopefully that actually strikes a chord with some of you that are listening, that if you're still struggling with that and you're doing this event, you're at the same level as somebody who isn't even involved in speech and debate. So you probably need to pay a little bit more attention and step your game up a little bit.
Yeah. And also, I mean, this is literally my career. And sometimes I get messed up on it.
True facts.
So
It's a confusing world we live in, confusing topics. They write them so that they are so specific. You have to be this level of clear and redundant.
I guess as a conclusion to how versus why, no matter what side you're on, if your opponents are just drilling you with how to do one side or the other, you can get up and in your response you can say, the resolution does not ask how, the resolution asks why that's preferable. Our opponent showing us how to do it does nothing to show why we should prioritize it.
And as long as you're including that how versus why as a concept in your framework argumentation in the introduction to your case somewhere, it'll be really easy to make that link during a crossfire or during a rebuttal or during anything that you need to really throughout the round. And it's going to allow you to just sidestep all of the how talk.
Yeah,
essentially.
The best way to think about it and maybe even portray it as a statement is that you are debating the results of an end goal, not the road getting there. A destination, not the path. Which destination is better? Doesn't matter how we get there. Fly there, drive there, take a bus. Which end destination is preferable? So that's the idea with that.
That being said, we're going to shift gears here a little bit, and we're going to try and do some example debates for you guys. Quentin is going to be our first speaker for these debates, and I'm going to be the second speaker. We're going to do it in a modified style to traditional public forum. We're going to have the case speech, the attack speech, the rebuttal, and the final focus. We'll be leaving out all crossfires and
other cases.
Yeah, the opposite cases.
So it'll be, I give a pro speech, then immediately after, not immediately, we'll have a little bit of prep time in between to discuss what was said, but I'll give a pro speech, and then Lucas will attack it as con, and then I will give a rebuttal as pro, and then Lucas will give his con final focus, and then we'll switch sides.
Clearly, there's going to be some things missing along the lines of crystallization. We're going to be missing the chance to bring up as much evidence and some clash, but hopefully this still serves the basic educational purpose.
Yeah, the idea of this is to show you what a flow of arguments is going to look like on each side. Keep in mind, these are cases I made. These cases are available in the first release of Candor briefs. They are the example cases. But your cases won't look exactly like this unless you use them. But your debates aren't going to look exactly like this. This is just an example.
And everything that I will be using to attack the cases was also available in the Candor briefs, minus any sort of logic-based or anecdotal arguments I might make.
Which you are free to use if you hear it and like it.
Yeah, true facts. I'm not going to come to the tournament and yell at you for using my logic-based arguments because I won't even know.
Unless he's the judge.
Because who is the judge?
God is the judge.
No.
That's weird without context.
The judge is it? Yeah. I feel like they have the context. That was the last episode. Or 2 episodes ago.
Yeah, but what if they didn't listen?
Well, go listen to it. If you're not sure what I'm meaning by who is the judge, either go watch the movie The Great Debaters and or go listen to the last episode because you're in the wrong spot.
Anyway, you are the judge. No.
The judge is God. We're getting tangential again.
Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and jump into the debate. What's going to happen first is, again, I'm going to read my case. Lucas is going to attack it as the con. I'm going to do a rebuttal as the pro. And Lucas will do a con final focus. After each speech, we're going to talk a little bit about the speech we just gave, the arguments we made. 1, for clarification and educational purposes. 2, for the other person to have a little bit of prep time because we're kind of missing out on 4 to 6 minutes of prep each because there's usually different speeches and crossfires in between to write these speeches. So we're going to do a little bit of timing with the clarifications and the explanations for that purpose. But what we're going to do now is we're going to read this case, or I'm going to read this case. This is on page 21 of the Candor Briefs first release. It is just the generic pro case, or the generic pro case for a lay judge. So, if my opponent is ready, he nodded. Okay, let's begin. My partner X and I stand in firm affirmation of the resolution stated resolved. The United States federal government should prioritize reducing the federal debt over promoting economic growth. The United States' current situation is crucial, more than it has ever been. We urge a pro vote for the following reasons. Contention 1. Debt is increasing dramatically when it shouldn't be. From Sumner, December 2nd. Today, it really is reason to be concerned about the deficit. For the first time in history, America is seeing its budget deficit rise dramatically higher during a period of peace and prosperity. There have been bigger deficits on occasion, but they were always associated with a temporary situation such as war or high unemployment. The current situation is unusual because the deficit has been soaring dramatically higher even as unemployment has fallen to the lowest level since the 60s. What Sumner tells us here is that the current situation is different than one we've ever had before as a nation. Normally, when our federal debt is this high, it is because we are in some sort of war or have high unemployment, but that is not the case. We have the lowest unemployment rate since the 60s, but our federal debt does not reflect that fact. We will explore the dangers of this in our contention 2. High debt is bad news for our economy. Subpoint A. Debt increases the likelihood of a fiscal crisis. Edwards, December 10th, says the CBO warns a large and continuously growing federal debt would increase the likelihood of a fiscal crisis in the U.S. Rosenberg on September 14th continues by saying, fiscal health is one of the foundations of the economy. When you are built on such an unsustainable foundation, should market sentiment tip in a negative direction for any number of reasons, the response is likely to be more severe. We just don't have the fiscal flexibility to address a major shock. We are on thin ice that can crack at any time. What this shows is simple. Our current debt puts us in a situation that makes a fiscal crisis likely. With our debt as high as it is, our economy frankly cannot handle any sort of shock. We truly are on thin ice. We continue this thought in our subpoint B. High debt reduces economic growth. From Carla Freed, 2010. Once federal debt exceeds 90% of GDP, history tells us growth slows dramatically. A study found that once a country's debt exceeds 90% of GDP, its economic growth takes a serious hit. We're currently scheduled to hit that figure by 2020. If you want to see our economy grow, you should be rooting for Washington to figure out a way to reduce our debt. What we see here is something that is very important to consider. Our opponents are going to tell you that economic growth is key, and they're going to sound good doing it. But the biggest problem is that high debt reduces our economic growth, proving that reducing our debt should be the priority to make growth possible. So what we've done today is we've shown you a few things over the speech. The first being that our situation is more problematic than ever before. Our debt does not reflect our economy, and it should be much lower for how low our unemployment rate is. One of the dangers of this is that it increases our likelihood of a fiscal crisis because our debt makes us incapable of handling any sort of economic shock. Our debt creates instability and needs to be solved for. Now, the second thing to consider is the fact that empirically, debt reduces economic growth. When our debt hits the level that we are on track for by next year, growth takes a serious hit. My opponents are going to sell you economic growth, but that simply cannot happen without first reducing our debt, which proves the priority and proves a pro vote. For these reasons and many more, we must kindly urge an affirmative ballot in today's debate. Thank you. I read that a little fast at the beginning.
Yeah, a little too fast at the beginning.
I was a little speedy. I was actually afraid it was going to be overtime. So I went a little fast, and then I realized that I still had a good amount of time left, so I tried to slow down. Sorry for that.
If you heard any weird noises right there, that was me swiveling my mic back around to jump in on the discussion with what Quentin just did. Yeah, I would agree that that was a bit of a speedy read.
At least at the beginning. I think I slowed down around subpoint A.
And obviously, we do listen to our podcasts before we release them, but how it's going to sound after it hits YouTube or the other platforms that we broadcast on is still going to be different than what we hear in our editing software. If things aren't coming across clearly, if we're talking too quickly, let us know. Send us an email, leave a comment down below, whatever it takes. We want to improve the quality of this product constantly for you guys.
Yeah, so a quick recap, clarification, sort of what would happen if there was a crossfire right now. Our contention one, or my contention one, is that our situation currently is different than it's ever been before, and that's supposed to prove some sort of danger. We typically, whenever we have debt like we do now, it's because of we're involved in a war or we have a high unemployment. Neither of those things are the case, so that makes our current debt dangerous. That's the idea between contention one. With contention two, it's that high debt is just bad. Subpoint A is that it increases the likelihood of a fiscal crisis. Essentially, high debt makes our economy unstable. So anything that happens is going to rocket. And subpoint B is that high debt reduces economic growth. The idea behind this is that if Con can somehow show that economic growth is a good idea, we have to prove, or this contention says, first we need to take care of high debt for economic growth to be possible. So that proves a priority.
Not a bad little case, Reed. I think that I am prepared to do my best at attacking it.
Do you have attacks ready? Because if you do, I'll let you take it.
Yeah,
and I'll start writing
if
my.
you would, just go ahead and scroll back up to contention 1. And as I go and move down the contentions, if you could scroll with me so that I can read the exact text of your cards like it would be if you handed me the evidence in the round.
Yeah, for sure.
I appreciate it. And
I'm going to swivel my mic away now.
that's totally fine. Almost caused a disaster. What you didn't see there was Quentin's drink nearly spilling on half of our electronics.
Gotta have my Coca-Cola.
Coke, hit us up. We love you. We love all that corporate stuff. Give us some sponsors. We'll share all the love, I promise. God, we sound like we want to sell out so bad.
I do.
Yeah.
I'm broke.
As long as you can give us creative freedom over our project, we will gladly sell out to you. I will wear a Coca-Cola shirt every day. I don't care.
All right, whenever you're ready.
In today's debate, we're discussing whether or not we ought to prioritize reducing the federal deficit, i.e. the debt, or promoting economic growth. I'm here to tell you why promoting the economic growth is going to be the better option of the two. My opponent brought us some good points today, and we're going to go ahead and move down those in order, starting with their contention 1, which is that debt is increasing dramatically when it shouldn't be. He cites some evidence from Sumner on December 2nd, where he discusses conceptually that in history, we haven't seen debt like this before. Generally, when we have high debt, it's because of a war, because of high unemployment. But that isn't the case right now. We're not in a large war, and we are at historically low unemployment, actually. So this shouldn't be occurring. This is a dangerous tipping point. Well, for one, I would argue that there isn't a humongous sense of urgency in this piece of evidence alone. I do know that he hits on it later in the case, and we'll circle back around to that. But realistically, unless you can give a time frame, or unless you hear a time frame with an argument like this, we have nothing to worry about. It's the same whistleblowing that the American people have been hearing for years with the economy. But if that isn't enough to convince you, let's talk about a card from Krugman in 2015, where he's talking about reliable and stable government and why debt can actually be kind of a good thing. He goes on to further explain that governments are able to accrue large amounts of debt such as this because they have such low borrowing rates on their loans. When you see these $17 trillion deficits, what can be done with that money by the federal government is much different than what a private individual could do with that money. So ultimately, the reason the debt is so high right now is because the government is able to put that money into infrastructure development. It's doing things like road work. It's doing things like electrical grid work. It's subsidizing public education, all these different things, private economic growth, the list goes on. So when they try to bring us this tipping point argument, and he tries to say that debt is so high and it shouldn't be, really, there's no time frame there. There's no sense of urgency. And I've just showed you why debt being high can be a good thing, especially when it's done with the federal government. So we're going to see that this contention 1 does fall. Now, moving down to the contention 2, he talks about how high debt is ultimately going to be bad news for the economy. We start with their subpoint A, and he says a large and continuously growing federal debt would increase the likelihood of a fiscal crisis in the United States. Again, we've seen many fiscal crises throughout the years, and empirically we've survived all of them. So a fiscal crisis alone is really not enough of a harm to scare you into voting for the affirmative team. But if that isn't enough to convince you, let's go ahead and talk about some evidence from Sumner in December 2nd of 2018, which is essentially this. The only harm that he could really draw from this is if you were to threaten economic collapse. A fiscal crisis isn't enough. You have to show us the actual tipping point. When is enough going to be enough? And realistically, government default, aka an economic collapse, is very unlikely due to the foundation of how our economy functions. The US can literally print more money. Yes, that's going to lead to increased inflation rates in the future. It's going to change borrowing rates on private loans, but that isn't an inherent inherently a bad thing, and it does prevent fiscal crisis and financial collapse. So this is just some whistleblowing that ultimately doesn't have a lot of substance to it. And that's what's going to lead us down to their subpoint B, where they talk about how high debt reduces economic growth. And for this, we're going to talk about a Rosenberg card from September 14th of 2018. Which is this, that the U.S. federal debt as a share of GDP is actually remaining well below the 90 to 100% threshold for long-term markets. So it's actually saying that the debt really isn't even that bad right now. This card is projecting that we're going to exceed that threshold by 2020, but realistically, I don't see that happening. And the fact is, this debt is only doing good things for the economy. It's allowing the government to invest in infrastructure. As we said, we're not past that threshold yet. This is just the same whistleblowing we've seen time and time again, and it's really not going to substantiate into any sort of impact that you need to vote for, which is ultimately why you need to be preferring economic growth over reducing the federal debt, and it's why I need to see a negative ballot in today's debate. Thank you. And I went over by
Lucas
16
Monroe,
seconds.
always going over time.
Yeah, I believe in the grace period. Now, 16 seconds is a
16
little
second grace
excessive, more like 5, maybe 10 at the very most. And if it's non-debate related, if it's all just transitional ending material.
Talk a little bit about your attacks. I'm almost done with my rebuttal.
Okay.
I just need a little bit of prep time.
So my attacks there, maybe not roadmap the best. We're a bit rusty. But in his first contention, when he's talking about debt's increasing when it shouldn't, essentially I was just saying that the reason that debt is high right now is because the government is spending and investing in itself. It's using this money on the infrastructure and social programs and subsidizing small businesses. There's a load of things. So I didn't see a harm in what he was addressing. He was essentially just saying, the debt's really high right now and it doesn't make any sense. And I said, well, this is why. And I think the fact that I was able to give him a reason as to why the debt was high right now might kind of put this contention to the wayside. The second contention they talk about, Quentin talked about how high debt was bad for the economy. And he says the fiscal crisis is more likely. And I say, well, fiscal crisis actually isn't likely at all because we can literally print more money. And I know that sounds silly, like, oh, wow, well, if we run out of money, why don't we just print more? You know, if poor people don't have money, why don't they just buy more? That seems silly in its concept, but that actually kind of is how it works. The Treasury has the ability to just inflate money and print more and put more into the economy so that we don't hit that default point. And it's not good for short-term economic growth. I will admit to that. It can be bad for interest rates. It can be bad for rates of inflation, but it doesn't in any way, shape, or form equal economic collapse. We've seen it happen dozens and dozens of times in the past. And so that's kind of how you can mitigate a harm that's associated with that kind of argument, that argument being debt makes fiscal crisis likely. And the subpoint B, contention 2, again, he said high debt reduces economic growth. And I essentially said, yeah, but it's not happening. Like, high debt does reduce economic growth, but he's projecting that it's going to clear this threshold in 2 years, and I'm saying it remains well below the threshold right now. I don't really see these things happening. We're just investing in infrastructure. So unless he can give me a really solid tipping point, a really solid time estimate that's better than just, this will happen by like 2020, it's just potential harms and fear mongering to try and change public social policy away from what it currently is. And yeah, I really like to lean on the concept of fear mongering in my speeches. I always have. I think that a lot of political capital is fear mongering. They just go out and say really scary things like fiscal crisis and economic collapse to get people to vote for policy that they don't necessarily understand, especially when the status quo oftentimes is holding, or if given 10, 15, 20 years would actually work, but we just don't do that. We're a I want it right now type of people. Instant gratification. That's the word I was looking for. We're an instant gratification society. So if, right now the government shutdown going on, if the budget that Congress passes hopefully soon doesn't fix things within a couple of weeks, people are pissed, and that doesn't make any sense.
I would agree. I didn't hear anything you just said.
Just like old times.
Just like old times. Okay, I think I have a rebuttal written.
Okay, so now we're going to go into Quentin's rebuttal. I'm going to swivel my mic away, and we're going to listen to what he has to say to what I said.
It's been a long time since I gave a rebuttal speech.
Have fun.
I'm excited, actually. I hope I can take out the full 2 minutes, and I don't go too fast. I always had an issue with reading my rebuttals so fast. Okay, let's see what happens. If my opponent is ready. Okay. My contention one is that debt is too high when it shouldn't be. My opponent attacked this a couple times by saying, first, the debt is high because we're borrowing to improve the nation while we have low interest rates. He also brings up Krugman 2015 showing that we need debt to function. I have response to both of these. First, this doesn't take away from the fact that we're in a situation that's never happened. He addresses this by saying we're trying to improve the nation, we need debt to function, etc., but this does not take away from the fact that we have borrowed to improve our nation before, but we have never been in a situation like the one we're currently in. What I'm getting at is that our situation it just doesn't make sense. For our debt to be this high, there should be other factors that are simply not there. For as low as our unemployment is, and for the fact that we are not in a war, we should not have this high of debt no matter what we're using that debt for, no matter what we're borrowing for. The situation is dire. Now, moving to our contention 2, subpoint A, it's that it increases the likelihood of a fiscal crisis. My opponent attacks this by saying that a default is unlikely, there is no urgency. However, the urgency is that our debt is growing every single day. Collapse isn't needed to prove a priority, and default may be unlikely, but instability is not. The status quo is an unstable economy, and that itself is the danger, and that proves the priority. That is the urgency itself. Our subpoint B is that increasing debt reduces economic growth. Now, Lucas says that we're not past the 90% threshold, but Amadeo December 20th says that as of last month, our debt to GDP ratio was 75%. We are right at that tipping point. Now, he also says that policies to reduce debt are more harmful than policies that promote economic growth. However, he gives no examples and no specifics. My opponent talks a lot about fear-mongering and lack of specifics, but then doesn't himself. He really does put the con in contradiction. So for these reasons, the fact that none of his attacks stand and all of our contentions still stand strongly, I must strongly become the urge of vote in affirmation. Thank you. 2 minutes right on the dot.
Nice.
Did you like that?
It was nice.
Thank you.
Yeah, I realized I didn't read one of the cards I meant to read.
What was it?
The Colander Forbes card.
Oh, you did.
Did I?
Yeah, you just didn't bring up any actual... you really just read the theory
But I
behind
can
it.
still bring it up because I read it. I'm so happy.
Yeah.
Okay.
See, now my job is over. Now he can bring that up if he wants to.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to take a minute and talk about your final focus while I...
Yeah, if you would like to talk about your rebuttal a little bit, feel free. I'm going to just make sure I get my voters straight.
Yeah, because this is great because every time I give a rebuttal speech, I always run out of time and don't get to talk about everything as in depth as I want to because 2 minutes goes by really fast. So what I did with the first contention, when I said debt is high when it shouldn't be, I took both of his attacks and essentially circumvented them by just bringing up the first contention again. He said, we're borrowing it to improve the nation while we have low interest rates. That's not a bad thing. We need debt to function, etc. I just turned around and said that doesn't solve the issue in the contention. It doesn't matter what the purpose of the borrowing is. It doesn't matter if we need debt to function, quote unquote. The situation we're in is different than any other empirical evidence before this. On our subpoint A, talking about the increased likelihood of a fiscal crisis, he said a default is unlikely, so there is an urgency. I create urgency by saying, one, our debt is increasing every day, and link it back to itself, saying that it creates an unstable economy, and that itself is the urgency. Every day that we don't solve this debt crisis creates a more unstable economy and creates that urgency itself. On our subpoint B, about reducing economic growth because of the debt, he said we're not past that 90% threshold that the card talked about. I brought up that we are pretty much there. We're at 75% as of last month. When you guys are debating this, it'll be last month.
I feel like you're about to hate me on that one.
What are you going to do?
I'm gonna economic you a little bit.
Oh. That just shows, especially since never did I bring up where we were at the time of the card. I can just say we're at 75% now with nothing to relate that to. That's going to tell the judge, wow, we're getting close.
But I'm going to relate that to something, and it's going to tell the judge that we're not close at all.
He's going to try at least.
Are you ready?
and also just against his argument about policies being dangerous that reduce the debt, I just brought up that he didn't bring up any specifics in his fear-mongering himself when he said I do that. So just spinning that background on him. But yeah, whenever you want to do your thing.
Okay.
I just did it again.
Let's go ahead and wrap this up. So in my final focus today, I'm going to be addressing some key voting issues and telling you why I think we need a negative ballot in today's debate. Now, the first thing I need to hit on again is that there is no immediate threat. The only thing that my opponent has brought to the table today is the fact that there is a debt threshold and we are approaching a 90% to 100% level. 90% wouldn't even mean economic collapse. 100% is the point at which we would hit economic collapse. And he cited the number of 75%. That's where we're at, and that's what's so scary and dangerous. So what I need everyone here to understand is that debt grows at a rate of about 1 to 3% per year. That as at most. It's 2018. The card gives a 2020 timeframe. There is no way that we're going to jump our threshold between 15 and 25% in 2 years. That's fiscally impossible. We'd have to spend, I don't even know, 150% more money than we are right now, 1,000% more money than we are right now. This doesn't happen. And he said it himself, this is a situation that's never happened, so it requires drastic solutions. Well, the fact that this is a situation that's never happened means that we really need to actually be gauging and measuring our response quite carefully. We can't just dive into this with policy that we've seen before. Referencing the Candor 2015 article one more time, the policies that are associated with mitigating the debt actually do a large amount of harm to economic growth. So if he's scared of that 75% number turning into a 90%, turning into a 100% and causing an economic collapse, it's only his policies that reduce the debt and drive down, the rate of economic growth in the United States that's going to do that. That's what's going to drive us to that collapse. That's what's going to create the fiscal crisis. And we can only see that the maintaining of the status quo is what's going to lead to good things for the U.S. future. So it's for those reasons and everything cited in today's debate that I can see nothing but a con ballot. Thank you very much for your time and attention.
I hate you.
Yeah, I mean, and we might be talking about something that I'm not correctly versed on at the moment, but I'm pretty sure what we're talking about right there is oh wow, that was probably really high spikes. What I'm pretty sure we're talking about right there is the rate of growth of debt versus the overall GDP every year.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah.
It doesn't increase that fast. I don't think we've ever seen the growth of debt exceed more than like 1 or 2% a year, an average of like 0.7. And that's with the assumption that GDP isn't going to outpace debt growth at some point in the next 2 years too, which, I mean, if we're following empiric trends, it probably won't.
Yeah.
But it's definitely not going to jump to 15 to 25%.
Right.
Or I guess it would have to be like 12.5% to meet your time frame.
Yeah.
But still not.
And the hard part about that is the card in the case is from almost 10 years ago.
But see, it's also only talking about long-term markets in those cards. It's not talking about like short-term economic markets. And it's weird because United States economics are so reactive to public opinion right now. Like the best example being recently when CEO Elon Musk was on Joe Rogan's podcast and he smoked a marijuana cigarette and it literally dropped their stock by like 5-6% that day.
Yeah.
And there was nothing associated with the quality of the business to that. People were just mad that they saw the CEO do something they didn't agree with and they hurt the economy because of it.
Yeah. And then people saw that other people were upset, and even if they weren't upset,
they were like, oh no, my money. And so they pulled theirs too. And it caused this weird ripple effect that is just, it's so strange. It's very reactionary. We need to be more considerate of our money, honestly.
So yeah, that was the debate where I was pro, Lucas was con. If you're watching on YouTube, comment who you think won if you want to. I'm kind of curious. I always loved doing MAV debates for that idea.
When we're talking about economics, nobody wins.
Yeah, true. Nobody wins on this topic. Or tweet us or whatever. Just give some input on how you thought that debate went.
If you thought we did awful, like I kind of think maybe we did.
Yeah.
Also, comment that because that was really rough.
That was rough. That was very rough.
But
and we're about to be rough again.
We're going to try and make it better, maybe less rough. We're going to be silky smooth.
Silky, silky smooth. Okay, so now we're going to switch sides here. I'm going to read a con case, just the generic lay con case that's in Candor briefs, and then Lucas is going to attack it as the pro. I'm going to give a rebuttal as the con, and Lucas will give a final focus as the pro. Same exact as we did just a second ago, but reversed. And I think I can actually read slower this time, so let's hope so. If everybody's ready. My partner X and I stand in firm negation of the resolution stated resolved. The United States federal government should prioritize reducing the federal debt over promoting economic growth. We support our advocacy with the following points. Contention 1. We actually need some debt to function. Krugman 2015. Economists argue that the economy needs a sufficient amount of public debt out there to function. Issuing debt is a way to pay for useful things, and we should do more of that when the price is right. The U.S. suffers from obvious deficiencies in roads, rails, water systems, and more. Meanwhile, the federal government can borrow at historically low rates, so this is a very good time to be borrowing and investing in the future. The debt of stable, reliable governments provides safe assets that help investors manage risks, make transactions easier, and avoid a destructive scramble for cash. Something not a lot of people consider is the positive side of debt. For investors, federal debt acts as a sort of cushion, providing safe assets that help manage risks. Right now is the perfect time to use this to our advantage and invest in growth of our future. We continue this thought process in our contention 2. The debt issue isn't immediate. We should focus on growth. From Bernstein, November 29th. This is not an immediate disaster that must be quickly rectified. Policymakers should ignore arguments that deficits and debt being good or bad. There are times, as in a downturn, when you want to worry whether your deficit is large enough to offset the demand shock. As the economy closes in on full employment, our revenue inflows should line up more closely with spending outflows. Bernstein shows us that the debt isn't a massive issue right now like our opponents will tell you. In our current situation, the economy is priming itself for us to create massive growth. That should be where our priorities lie. Contention 3. Growth is key to gradually reducing debt. From Candor 2015. The International Monetary Fund has issued a report saying that for the U.S., a budget surplus to pay down the debt makes no sense. The cure would seem to be worse than the disease. The IMF says that the better way to deal with this is for the economy to grow and the existing debt to become a smaller percentage of GDP. When it is the right time to begin reducing our debt, growth is the way to do it. By voting negative today, you allow us to start creating growth that can eventually reduce our debt in the right way by making it a smaller percentage of our GDP by actually increasing our GDP. Debt reduction without growth is unnecessary and dangerous. Our economy needs debt as a cushion, so we should use this time as an opportunity to create growth so that in the future we can reduce our debt in an economically efficient way. Voting pro makes that impossible. For these reasons and many more, we must kindly urge a negative ballot. Thank you. Geez, that's just a short case.
Yeah.
I'll time them next time.
Please do.
Yeah, that's a little bit embarrassing.
I'm disappointed.
Me too.
But that's okay.
The arguments are still there. The evidence is still there.
It means it's probably going to be a short attacking speech, too.
No, you better... No. Don't do that.
I'm going to attempt. That's all I can do.
Do you have everything you need?
I think so. Yeah, I'm actually going to use some of the evidence that you talked about with DDev on 2 and 3.
Okay.
And I'm just going to split it. Because it's going to make more sense.
I'm going to swing my mic away and let you do your thing.
Yeah, because you 2 and 3 are kind of the same thing.
Sort of, yeah.
But if everybody's ready, we'll go and get started. In today's debate, I'm going to be telling you exactly why we need to focus on promoting economic growth. Starting with my opponent's contention 1, and where they talk about reducing federal debt and how we need debt to function. We're going to look at a card from Wallace in November of 29th. And essentially he's saying that the economy is primed for growth right now, that the amount of debt we have is awesome. It's going to make private investors really comfortable. They're going to go out and make huge moves in the economy soon, so just don't worry about it. We're going to be okay. Well, Wallace disagrees. He actually says the economy is primed for something called stagflation right now, which is a combination of inflation and stagnation of growth. essentially the last time that we saw unemployment such as this, a deficit such as this, and other economic factors such as these was in the 80s and 90s, and what it led to was stagnation and inflation. There was almost no growth under that instance, and there was an inflation, which just lowers the spending power of the dollar, and it lowers the spending power of your dollar at home. Those are effects that you'll see in your very own home. Going to the grocery store, your money just won't go as far as it used to, and that's a big harm in today's debate. That being said, we're going to move on to their contention 2, where they talk about how debt isn't pressing and we just simply need to focus on growth. And in a perfect world, I would agree that we can always just increase economic growth enough to mitigate debt. However, this isn't a perfect world. This is the real world that we live in. And when we talk about the real world that we live in, we have to talk about limited resources. And that's what we're going to talk about in response to this contention. We look at a card from Demaria in February of 2018, where essentially if we continue to increase economic growth at the rate we have, there's going to be no sustainability for our environment. What's going to happen here is we've been consuming coal and oil and shale gas and all these different natural resources that are not replenishable. They don't come back after they're gone at unprecedented rates. And the only way to increase economic growth is to continue consuming those resources at even more unprecedented rates. And if we could just do that forever, maybe we could fix the debt, but we can't. We can't do that forever. In fact, we're doing it at a rate right now where we're consuming some 50% of the available resources, and this is just unacceptable. This is going to only lead to more harms for the environment and for the economy, because eventually we will be hitting peak oil, we will be hitting peak shale, we will be hitting all sorts of different ceilings, and ultimately it just leads to an instance where we have to prioritize reducing the debt over promoting economic growth, because when there's no more resources to go around, we can't continue to promote economic growth. We'll have to answer that question rather than just putting a Band-Aid on it. And that's what's going to lead us down to their contention 3, where he says that growth is key to reducing the debt. We're going to do some more evidence from Chappell in 2013, where he actually talks about, again, we're just not even using the materials that we can recycle very well. We're going back to talking about how we can't continue this rate of unprecedented economic growth, that of the non-renewable resources that we're using too many, 50% too many throughout the year. And that's only continuing to grow. And then of the resources that are reusable, that are renewable, we are using we're using faster than we can even replenish in the first place. So not only are we using the resources that we can't replenish too fast, we're using the ones that we can replenish too fast as well. So again, even if growth is key to reducing the debt, it's not a sustainable key. It's not a sustainable solution. So I might agree with my opponent if we lived in a world with unlimited natural resources, but we don't. And it's like Thanos said in the Avengers, sometimes the hardest decisions require the strongest wills. And it's for that reason and that reason alone that I can't see anything but a negative ballot in today's debate. An affirmative ballot, I told him to vote for me, guys. I guess I lost. Or vote for him, whatever.
Talk a little bit while I write my rebuttal.
So what we did there was some DDev evidence on the last 2 contentions. It's actually a really good angle on this topic. I wish we had talked about in the last podcast. Yeah, so thank you to whoever made the suggestion / request that we cut some DeDevelopment evidence, because it opened up a whole new angle that I hadn't considered. And that's the fact that it's true. Unless the markets in the United States are geared around clean energy, are geared around renewable resources and sustainable practices, basically, you can't just constantly increase production. There's not just going to be more jobs. There's not just going to be more resources. That's just not realistic. That isn't a government model or an economic model that considers posterity, and that's just irresponsible. I can't abide that, and I don't think you should either. And I'm going to squeeze in a little call to action here. If you agree with us and you don't think that we need to, if you think we are focusing on unsustainable energy practices, and if we are growing industry too fast to keep up with resources in the world, maybe call your local senator, your local representative, and give them a piece of your mind. Let them know that they need to be promoting more green policy, because it's the only thing that we know without a shadow of a doubt we won't run out of, at least not for a few billion years, and that sounds pretty good to me. About done, Quentin?
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay. And yeah, that's really all I had to say about it. This DDEV evidence is new to me, so I wish I could talk more in depth on it, but I don't want to do it injustice or misspeak. And if anything we've been talking about today is factually inaccurate, or if you have a different take on it, feel free to email us. Feel free to leave it in the comments down below. We want as much community involvement as possible on this. Otherwise, it's just two dudes sitting in a room talking to each other. And as fun as that is, we've done enough of that. I don't think I can fill any more space, so I hope that Quentin has his rebuttal ready.
Okay, so my rebuttal is ready. Essentially what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over the attacks made on my case and respond to them and show why they do not stand on my case does. So if everybody is ready.
I am ready.
You are. I don't think you're ready.
He's not ready.
He wasn't. Okay. Looking at our contention 1, it says that we need some debt to function. My opponent attacked this by saying the economy is going into quote-unquote stagflation. It says that our situation is empirically similar to the 80s and 90s, and this is from Wallace on November 29th. I have 2 responses. First, Well in 2018 quotes the federal chief Powell saying, "There is no sense in the data that we are on an acceleration of inflation." This is literally the head of the Fed saying that we are not heading towards inflation. So that's my first response. The second is from English in 2018 saying that wage growth is at 2.7% and that we actually have a lot of room in the economy before we hit a dangerous mark. So do not believe this idea of stagflation. 1, it's a made-up word. 2, we are not heading towards it. Now, if we look at our second contention and third contention, my opponent attacked this the same way with this idea of DeDevelopment. He says first that growth is unsustainable for the environment. And that DeDevelopment is actually the idea that growth is actually bad. But if we look at Johnson in 2016, he shows facts from 2015 that actually the global GDP has been increasing a lot each year, but emissions have stayed the same flat rate since 2013. So that shows that the environmental impacts and economic growth are decoupling. And I'll show why. Because he attacks this again by using Chaplin 2013 saying that we are using resources 50% faster than we can replace them. But Johnson 2016 continues by saying last year, 90% of the new electricity that was created was made using renewables and not the old ways of coal and gas. So this shows 1, that this is no longer an issue, and 2, that we are not having environmental impacts. So our first contention still stands because we are not heading toward this stagflation, and our second and third contention still stands because we have decoupled the environmental impacts from economic growth. So for these reasons, I urge a con ballot. Thank you. So do you want to write to your final focus and I'll talk about this a little bit?
You can talk about it a little bit. I think my final focus is pretty much ready.
You haven't written anything down, or you're just going on the fly?
Yeah. That's what I always used to do.
Movies on the fly. Okay, I'll talk about it just a little bit. I didn't have any actual blocks to the idea of stagflation, so I just went for blocks on inflation itself and hoped it would work. The federal chief Powell evidence works, I think, as sort of a call to authority. It shows no real evidence that we're not heading towards inflation. It's just an important dude saying we're not. So that'll connect with the judge, but in reality, that's not a great argument. But also I showed that wage growth is at 2.7%. That's just a number that shows that wages are growing as sort of an argument against inflation. Now, the DDEV argument is great. I love the DeDevelopment argument, but I do have blocks to it. The first one is that we are decoupling the environment impacts from economic growth, just using empirics from 2015, that we've been seeing economic growth, but our emissions have been staying the same. That doesn't really respond to the resources part of that, but it does decouple a lot of environmental impacts. And the same thing going on to say that 90% of the new ways that we've been creating electricity are using renewable resources and not the old ways of coal and gas that typically have that huge environmental impact. So again, just trying to decouple those two things. That was pretty much my rebuttal. Are you ready for your final focus?
I believe that I am.
Okay. Here's a timer. I'm going to swing my mic away whenever you're ready.
All right, let's wrap things up. There exists a grave and impending threat on the human race. The environment is moving towards a tipping point. My opponent comes up here today and says, well, emissions rates are actually about the same as they were in 2013. And we're actually producing even more green energy now than we have in a long time, using mostly electricity from alternative resources and alternative fuels. This isn't good enough. When we look back to our evidence from DeMaria, it actually specifically says that we're using an increased amount of these non-renewable resources every year. It counters his evidence directly. The fact that 90% of electricity is being produced using alternative energy doesn't account for every industry. It doesn't even account for production, the largest industry in the United States. So this really doesn't look at the largest amount of our environmental footprint. That, coupled with the fact that our Chapel evidence in 2013 goes on to say, of the renewable resources we have, we're even consuming those faster than we can replace them because of current means of production. That only serves to further the point that even in the areas where we are switching to alternative fuels, we're using those alternative fuels too fast. Simply put, the economy's too big. We're producing too much. We are not ready as a species nor as a society to be doing the economic undertakings that we currently are attempting to do. What this is going to lead to in the long run is a view that shifts away from economics. We can drop every single economic point, every single economic impact to my opponents. We can say they win the economy completely. I can even agree that economic growth is better than reducing federal debt, or vice versa, because it doesn't matter. A large amount of economic growth is only going to lead to environmental harms. Those impacts are real impacts. They affect people like you and me, animals, the planet as we know it. And it's for that reason and nothing more that I can see only a negative ballot in today's debate. Affirmative ballot in today's debate. Man, I'm telling you, I'm so screwed up on what is affirmative and negative in this debate. It's so easy to flip sides.
But that was a great final focus and a great example of just a heartfelt final focus. I know you guys couldn't see Lucas, but he didn't look at his notes. He wasn't reading points off a piece of paper. He was, in theory, staring at the judge, looking him in the eyes and telling them, save the environment by voting affirmative. Save the world, really, was the idea.
Because if the judge knows anything about current events, they're going to know that even if the U.S. is switching to a large amount of alternative fuels right now, and even though the resolution is mostly in the scope of the United States, we do affect the rest of the world as we have the largest economy. And India, China, they're not slowing down on fossil fuels. They're only industrializing further. And we have a responsibility as the largest industrious nation in the world to be leading the charge on converting to alternative fuels, to getting production mostly on alternative fuels, because electricity production has never been a large producer of the emissions outputs that we're afraid of. It's been the production of fossil fuels and just literal production, like
production in general, yeah.
Of iPhones, of computers, of all electronics, of action figures and toys and all those things. That's where the pollution's coming from. It's not from electric plants.
The thing about this debate is, one, I don't get my own final focus just because of the way we did this right here. I didn't have attacks to his case to bring up more points of my own, but I did fail to do any real impacts with that case. I said, here's what we can do, here's why we should do growth, but I didn't show any impacts, and I wish I had, because there's some really good cards in the Candor Brief second release that move past just do economic growth to showing actual impacts of what economic growth is. We have cards that say, the failure of economic growth is the root cause of conflict, saying
like war?
That, yeah, war.
Oh, okay.
War comes from not creating economic growth. Economic development is the key to military successes. In the past, we've seen that the person that wins the war is the person that has a better economy and more growth.
Man, okay. Can you go back up to that card really quick?
Yeah.
If economic development is the key ingredient for an effective military, then the growth of China's economy is synonymous with the expansion of its military potential. I don't like that.
That's scary, huh?
No, it's not scary at all. It's a stupid card.
Why?
Because they're not just going to spend every extra dollar they make on their military.
Right, but every extra dollar they make, a portion of that goes.
I want you all to Google an article called "What Would Happen If the United States Went to War with the Rest of the World?" And I want you to use that to get kind of an idea on where the military's at in the U.S.
Well, you
currently.
should do that because another war impact of economic growth is that Kumar 2015 economic decline triggers a U.S.-China war.
Now, if I can prove that U.S.-China war is inconsequential because we win every time, like 100 times out of 100, does it matter?
I think it does.
Because it's still war happening, so it's still bad.
war.
Yeah, that's fair.
It's still war. But even moving past war, there's economic growth impacts of quality of life, reducing poverty, improving quality of life, and actually creating political stability.
Yeah.
So I had a lot of opportunities to move past just economic growth and show economic growth impacts because I have cards for it, obviously. I just didn't do that well enough. So that's on me. But
I really like the concept of pulling this debate away from the economic scope and tying that economic scope into an environmental impact or a war impact or something like that. Something else, because it's so, like we discussed before, it's so hard to talk about economics because just to explain what you're talking about, like in the first debate where we were talking about the 75 to 90% threshold, I can't even be certain that we're talking about overall GDP at that point.
Yeah.
We might only be talking about specific long-term markets and the growth associated with those, or we might only be talking about a handful of Fortune 500 companies, which aren't even an accurate way to measure the economy anymore.
Yeah. It's so messy,
but what's not messy is talking about environmental collapse or war being caused,
politics or quality of life.
That's really easy to talk about and understand.
If you can take the economic arguments and move them past the impacts of economics, that's going to be way easier to connect with a judge.
And I think it's going to cause you a lot of success on this topic.
Yeah, because everybody's going to be talking about the same thing. Economic growth, more GDP, more money, wage growth, economic growth. Not a lot of people, I think, are going to be talking about, hey, do you want another war? Or, hey, do you want less poverty, better quality of life? Do you want to save the environment? That kind of thing. Not only is that going to stick out to the judge, not only are people not going to be expecting it most of the time and maybe not have arguments to it, I'm not sure. But it's going to create a unique debate.
Well, I think it allows you to come across, like in my final focus, with this sincerity.
Right.
Where I'm no longer an economist talking to you about another economic policy and showing you another 35 flowcharts that are compared to 45 years of empirics to try and prove some weird trend that may not. It's like a beautiful mind, you know. It's that weird, crazy flow chart where he's got all the things with the push pins and the strings. And I wish we could have a visual representation, but that
or Pepe Sylvia.
Yeah, exactly. That kind of that kind of argumentation is so difficult because you're having to not only put all the pins in the board but show the judge all the string connections. But when you're talking about something like going to war or the environment, it's so easy to talk about and so easy to make it clear to the judge because you can paint that picture clearly every day of the week.
And I think also, you know, just debating economic growth or reducing federal debt, there's not many links, there's not many impacts. I think adding out of the box impacts creates more links and those are fun to defend.
It also makes it more realistic.
Yeah, it really does.
That's probably what policymakers are talking about with this rather than, because I kind of doubt that most of our people in Washington have a massive background in economics. They're probably not sitting there comparing empirical data. They're probably actually talking about war and
well, I mean, most of them are also just career politicians.
That's true. But we can get into that in the after hours sessions.
After dark sessions, yeah.
Well, how much more after dark can we get than 11:30?
Is it 11:30?
It's 11:35.
Wow, I was going to try to get you home by like 11:30.
Yeah, that's okay. We can wrap it up pretty soon.
I think this was a good episode. I like debating and actually debating the topics. I think we should do it more.
We are going to only try and continue to improve the quality of this for you guys in the future. We're so excited to be close to 1,000 plays. We hope that you've enjoyed listening tonight. But as always, I'm Lucas Monroe.
I am Quentin Cooper. I have a couple of things to say, so don't wrap it up yet.
My apologies.
1, check us out on Twitter, @FormerPartners. Give us a follow, tweet us. Not many people follow us, so if you follow us and tweet us, we'll probably respond if that's something you're interested in. Also, don't forget, CandorDebate.com, using the promo code 2019-2019 at checkout gives you 75% off any briefs you want. First and second release of Candor briefs, which we used in this episode, are on there. You can get them for 75% off.
But for a super special additional 10% off, and if you've stayed for this long, use the additional promo code EDUCATIONAL.
Wait, no, it doesn't let you do two at once.
Well, wouldn't... Oh, I guess because it's the website now. It's a different kind of marketplace, isn't it? My apologies. Disregard that.
Yeah, I wish today the promo code is 2019, and instead of $5 off, it's 75% off.
That's really good.
You can get both briefs, normally $45 for $11.25 if you use the promo code 2019 at checkout. That's in celebration of the new website. I hope you like it. Follow us on Twitter at Candor Briefs or at Former Partners. I think that's all I have.
Okay, well then we'll try this again. As always, I am Lucas.
And I am Quentin.
And this has been Former Partners Podcast.
Thanks, enjoy, and good luck.